That night, I brought my black card to a prepared table. White linen, blue ink, and papers they thought were just for the bill. "You owe the neighborhood," Pat snapped. The man who'd shoved me in front of the entire board as an adult smirked as if my money was the HOA's to claim. I just nodded, settled the account, and revealed the table's real purpose. Turned out what they signed wasn't gratitude. It was the end of her iron grip on Serenity Shores. My name is Elena Voss, 32. I've learned that the most effective negotiations aren't the ones with raised voices at emergency meetings, but with the quiet, unassailable weight of preparation. Control is in the details, the thread count of the linen, the precise shade of ink in the pen, the polished silence of a room that has been paid for well in advance. Tonight, my stage was a private dining room called the Winter Table at Citron House, the crown jewel of Lakefield, Illinois. Lakefield is a town that prides itself on its serene facade. It's a postcard-perfect slice of the Midwest, a prosperous city hugging the shore of Lake Michigan, where old money resides in stone mansions and new money builds glass houses that stare out at the water. But tucked inside is Serenity Shores, our gated HOA paradise. On the surface calm, respectable, and meticulously maintained. It's the kind of place that teaches you the value of keeping your real business hidden behind a veneer of quiet compliance. Grass no taller than 3 inches. Flags no larger than 3 by 5. Holiday lights off by January 15th. The rules were endless, and the woman who wrote them loved reminding everyone they existed for the good of the community. I learned that lesson better than most. To the board, I was simply doing okay. I was Elena, the one who worked a steady if vaguely defined corporate job, the one who could be counted on for a thoughtful neighborhood potluck contribution but would likely flinch at volunteering for the annual block party cleanup. I had cultivated this image with the same precision I applied to a balance sheet. I let them believe I was just getting by because their belief was a strategic asset. It kept their expectations low and their citation pads out of my mailbox. Until now. The HOA president, Patricia "Pat" Whitaker, is a woman of considerable charm, a fading Southern belle who still knows how to command a room with a well-timed smile and a string of pearls. But beneath the grace is a core of pure pragmatism. She operates on a transactional basis, a silent accounting of favors given and debts owed in the name of community standards. Her husband, my personal tormentor, is Roger Whitaker, 58. Roger is all rough edges and blunt force. He owns Whitaker Landscaping, the company that somehow always wins the HOA maintenance bids despite the ridiculous markups. He moves through the world as if it owes him a permanent debt of gratitude for his hard work. He is loud, domineering, and possesses a profound disrespect for anything he cannot physically intimidate or fine into submission. Then there is Tyler, their son. At 24, he's fresh out of business school with an MBA and the condescending certainty that comes with it. He views the neighborhood as a series of case studies and cash flow analyses. He has his mother's transactional nature but none of her charm, and his father's entitlement but none of his work ethic. He is not a child. He is a calculator in a well-fitted suit, and his loyalties are always aligned with the projected winner. No one in this story is a child. The damages inflicted were strictly between adults. The catalyst for tonight's performance arrived 2 days ago as a group text on my phone. It was from Pat. 5 words that lit a fuse I'd been carefully tending for a decade. "You owe the neighborhood, Elena." It wasn't a request. It was an invoice. I knew exactly what it meant. I could hear her voice in the sterile text, the gentle lilt that barely masked the steel beneath it. The follow-up message, when I didn't immediately reply, provided the justification. This community welcomed you, helped you when you were just starting out. It's time you gave back. Welcomed me. The phrase was a masterpiece of revisionist history. But I knew the real pressure wasn't coming from the community. It was coming from Roger. Whitaker Landscaping was sinking. I didn't need to hire a private investigator to know it. I just needed to listen. The casual complaints at board meetings about the price of mulch. The grumbling about suppliers being slow to pay. The sudden desperate interest in my own financial health. It was all there. A quick, discreet inquiry through a contact confirmed it. Roger was behind on his commercial taxes, significantly so. The loan on his new Ford F-250, the one he polished every Sunday as a monument to his success, was teetering on default. He was drowning in the quiet, suffocating way of a small business owner who had leveraged his HOA connections far beyond his capital. And so they had turned to me, the homeowner who was just doing okay. I had already made the reservation at Citron House. It was meant to be for the annual HOA appreciation dinner next month. Quiet, elegant gathering where Pat could preen and hand out her little community hero plaques. But her text message changed the agenda. It transformed the reservation from a celebration into a deposition. The appreciation dinner would now serve a higher purpose. It would be a tribunal. When I called the restaurant to amend the arrangements, I was specific. "I'll need the winter table, Jean-Luc," I'd said to the manager. "And I have a particular request for the setup." I chose the room for its stark elegance. It was minimalist, with walls the color of a pale winter sky and a single dramatic window overlooking the dark, churning lake. There were no distractions, no art to draw the eye, no plush furnishings to soften the atmosphere. There was only the table. I had instructed them to use the long rectangular oak table, not the cozier round one. It was to be covered in a single piece of heavy, immaculate white linen, pressed so flat that it reflected the cool light from the overhead fixture. The surface had to be perfect, a blank slate. At one end, precisely in the center of my place setting, I had them place a simple, heavy silver cup holding 3 identical fountain pens. The ink was a deep, authoritative navy blue. This was not a dinner table. It was a signing table. As I stood in the room before they arrived, I ran my hand over the cool, smooth linen. The fabric was unforgiving. It would hold a wine stain just as surely as it would hold the memory of the documents I would place upon it. The air was still, scented faintly with beeswax and the crisp, cold air blowing in off the lake. I adjusted the pen holder, turning it a 1/4 inch to the left so it sat in perfect alignment with the edge of the table. Every detail mattered. Every choice was a calculated move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. The text message hadn't angered me. Anger was a hot, messy emotion, unproductive. What I felt was a cold, clarifying calm. The kind that comes when a long-dreaded event finally arrives and you find you are more than prepared to meet it. You owe the neighborhood. They had no idea what I owed. They saw a decade of my life in which I had quietly, deliberately built a fortress. They saw the modest car I drove, the simple house I kept, the one they had cited 6 times for non-compliant mulch color, the careful way I talked about expenses at board meetings. They didn't see the property compliance consulting firm I owned, the one that audited HOAs for Fortune 500 developers and managed high-stakes regulatory filings. They didn't see the contracts I negotiated, the assets I had accumulated, the power I wielded in rooms filled with people far more formidable than Roger Whitaker. They saw the person I allowed them to see. Tonight, the curtain would fall on that performance. File 2. Exactly 1,000 words. I looked out the window at the black water, the distant lights of the city twinkling like scattered diamonds. My reflection stared back from the glass. A woman in a simple, perfectly tailored black dress. Her expression composed, her posture straight. Ready. Tonight we make it clear, I whispered to the reflection, my breath fogging a small circle on the cold pane. Either they would finally see my true value, understand the cost of their assumptions, and accept the terms of a new relationship, or they would sign the papers that would legally and permanently excise their stranglehold from my life and this neighborhood. The debt would be paid one way or another, on my terms, at my table. They arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, sweeping through the heavy beveled glass doors of Citron House as if arriving for a coronation, or, in Roger's case, a hostile takeover. The lobby was a symphony of quiet, intimidating wealth. A massive tiered crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, scattering prisms of light across the polished Italian marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of hothouse lilies and the faint, expensive wisp of beeswax. In the distance, the low murmur of privileged conversation was punctuated by the delicate musical chime of clinking glassware. Pat, the HOA president, glided across the floor, her hand resting on Roger's arm, a picture of practiced elegance. She wore her good pearls, the ones she always clutched when someone dared question a fine. Roger, by contrast, seemed to absorb the luxury and radiate it back as sheer belligerence. His suit, a size too tight in the shoulders, strained as he surveyed the room, his expression a mixture of contempt and appraisal, as if he were mentally calculating the cost of the gilded mirrors lining the walls. Tyler trailed them, his phone in his hand, affecting an air of bored familiarity that his darting, covetous eyes completely betrayed. He looked like a man who had read about wealth in a textbook and was now desperately trying to mimic its posture. As they approached the hostess stand, Jean-Luc, the manager, stepped forward, his movements fluid and discreet. He bypassed them completely and addressed me, his focus singular, his smile professional but warm. Ms. Voss, pleasure to have you with us again. The winter table is ready for you. Precisely as you requested. I saw Pat's head turn. Just a fraction. Her smile faltered. A tiny hairline crack in the facade. Ms. Voss. Not Elena. Not our dear resident. It was a small thing, a courtesy title. But in this environment, it was currency. It signified a relationship with the establishment that she hadn't known about, and it planted the first tiny seed of doubt in her mind. She recovered instantly, her smile re-cementing itself, but her eyes held a new assessing flicker as she looked at me. This way, please, Jean-Luc said, leading us away from the main dining hall down a quiet carpeted corridor that absorbed the sound of our footsteps. He opened a heavy unmarked oak door and gestured us inside. The winter table. It was exactly as I'd ordered. The room was stark, dominated by the long white linen table and the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto the furious black chop of Lake Michigan. The only sound was the distant howl of the wind pressing against the thick glass. It was intimate, but not warm. It was an isolation chamber. Wow. Private room, Tyler muttered, impressed in spite of himself. Roger merely grunted, pulling out a chair, a heavy upholstered captain's chair without waiting for Pat. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He grabbed the menu, a thick leather-bound volume, and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the prices for the set menu, and a low, derisive snort escaped him. He slapped the menu down on the table, the sound cracking the silence. Hope you brought the big bucks, Elena, he sneered, his voice filling the small room, coarse and abrasive. You can cover this, right? Or is this one of those wheel-split-it deals? I didn't look at him. I was watching Pat, who was watching Tyler. Tyler leaned in close to her, his voice a conspiratorial whisper I was clearly meant to overhear. She's probably putting it on that low-limit credit card again. Mom, we'll be hearing about this for months. I smiled. It was a small, polite gesture that didn't reach my eyes. I simply unfolded my napkin and placed it in my lap. Everything has been taken care of. Right on cue, the sommelier entered. The tall, thin man with a silver taste vin hanging from a ribbon around his neck. He didn't address the table. He addressed me. Ms. Voss. The Chateau Margaux you requested. An excellent choice. He presented the bottle, a deep dark red, the label proclaiming a vintage that cost more than Roger's monthly truck payment. I nodded. Thank you,
Antoine.
please decant it. Tyler's eyes widened. He knew enough from his MBA parties to recognize the ritual, if not the specific label. Pat looked confused, her pragmatism warring with her appreciation for the display. Roger just looked impatient. Just open the damn bottle, pal, Roger grumbled.
Antoine.
To his credit, didn't even flinch. He proceeded with the formal, almost surgical ritual of decanting the wine, the red stream catching the light as it poured into the crystal decanter. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the wine breathing. He poured a small tasting amount into my glass. I lifted it, inhaled the scent of black currants, tobacco, and old leather, and took a small sip. The complexity of it flooded my palate. It was a warrior of a wine, structured and powerful, perfect. It's fine, I said. Antoine nodded, satisfied, and moved around the table, pouring for Pat and Tyler first. He hesitated at Roger, who had his water glass pushed forward. None of that fruity crap for me. Got a beer? A Miller Lite? I'm afraid not, sir, Antoine said, his voice smooth as silk. Only what is on our list. Fine, whatever. Roger waved him off and Antoine filled his wine glass, which Roger immediately picked up and gulped like it was fruit punch. As Antoine retreated, closing the door softly behind him, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The performance was over. The agenda was on the table. Pat picked up her glass, holding it by the bowl instead of the stem, and gave me her most charming practiced smile. Well, this is all just lovely, Elena. Truly, it's so nice that you're doing well enough to treat the board. I'm glad you like it, Pat, I said. She took a sip, her smile tightening just a fraction. Which brings us, she said, setting the glass down, to a little neighborhood matter. Here it was, the pivot. You know, we've always supported you, honey, she began, her voice dripping with maternal sincerity. And the community helps the community. That's just what we do. I remained silent, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. Elena, she said, her voice dropping into a more serious, confidential tone. You owe the neighborhood. You owe Serenity Shores. I met her gaze. Oh, don't play coy, Roger barked, slamming his empty glass down. The sound made Pat jump. Pat's talking about loyalty, something you don't know much about. Roger, please, Pat said, placing a hand on his arm, the gentle peacemaker. She turned back to me. Honey, it's just that Roger took care of that big landscaping compliance issue. The one right when you were new here. It was thousands, Elena. Money the HOA didn't really have. He did it for you so you'd have a proper yard. That's right. Roger leaned forward, his bulk straining his suit jacket, his eyes small and hard. I paid my dues to this community. I took care of you when you were just a nobody with the wrong mulch. I enforced those rules. I paid for that citation waiver.
I paid Malasia dues.
Now it's your turn. The room, so carefully climate-controlled, suddenly felt frigid. The expensive wine in my glass, the plate of artfully arranged amuse-bouche the waiter had silently deposited, the starched white linen. It all felt like a movie set, a backdrop for the crude, brutal transaction they were proposing. This was the push and pull. They would surround me with the trappings of civility, of community, of luxury, and then demand their pound of flesh, expecting the setting itself to cushion the blow and ensure my compliance. They had, as always, miscalculated. I let the silence hang, letting their words echo in the small space. You owe the neighborhood. It's your turn. I took another slow sip of my wine. Then I reached down to the briefcase bag resting by my feet. I retrieved a folder. It wasn't a cheap plastic binder. It was bound in heavy dark blue leather, the kind used for closing documents on a multi-million-dollar deal. It was minimalist, professional, and held a quiet, significant weight. It looked perhaps like a very expensive day planner or a notebook. I placed it on the table, aligning its edge with the edge of my placemat. The sound it made as it connected with the linen-covered table was a soft, definitive thud. Roger eyed it with suspicion. "What's that?" "Your budget, figuring out how much you can spare." Pat just watched the folder. Her intuition was sharper. She knew it wasn't a budget. I looked at Pat, then at Roger, and finally at Tyler, who was trying to look indifferent and failing. "I will be settling the account tonight," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly across the table. "And then everything is going to change." My words hung in the air, colder than the wind outside. Roger's face, already florid from the wine, darkened to a dangerous mottled purple. Pat's hand fluttered to her pearls, a nervous bird-like gesture. Tyler just stared at the leather folder on the table as if it were a live grenade. The smell of the rich wine, the oak and dark fruit, filled my senses. But beneath it, I could almost smell something else, the sour, stale scent of entitlement. Pulled me back 10 years. I was 22, an adult by any legal definition. I had just closed on my first home in Serenity Shores. It was a Wednesday night board meeting. Roger came in late, stumbling from whatever bar he'd visited and radiating a familiar, volatile anger. I had spoken up against a ridiculous new rule about mailbox colors. He cornered me in the hallway afterward, his body blocking the doorway, his breath a foul wave of cheap whiskey and self-pity. "Give it up, little girl," he slurred. "The rules are the rules." When I refused to back down, he shoved me hard against the wall. Not a punch, an open-handed, explosive crack of force that sent my head snapping to the side. My cheekbone erupted in a hot, stinging fire. My ears rang. For a second, the world went white at the edges. I saw Pat standing in the doorway to the meeting room. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of something, fear, maybe shock, before her gaze slid away, fixing on a point on the wall just over my shoulder. "Don't provoke him, Elena," she said, her voice quiet, almost conversational. That was the moment, not the shove. The shove was just physics. Her words, her averted eyes, that was the true impact. That was the betrayal that left a deeper mark. He was a bully, a drunk. That was his nature. But she was the president. She was supposed to be the shield for every resident. Instead, she had just told me to stand still and take the hit. I didn't say another word. I pushed past him, went home, and started documenting. I packed away the illusion that this neighborhood was safe and took a second job while I built my company. The sound of the meeting room door clicking behind me that night was the first true moment of my adult life. That night was a symptom. The disease ran deeper. The welcome package they had promised, supposed to be a small grant for new homeowners, was gone. When I asked about it, Pat had wrung her hands. "Roger invested it for the community," she explained. "He was going to make it grow. He'd promised. A sure thing. But the money had evaporated. It was a bad break. Just bad luck." I knew even then that it wasn't bad luck. It was theft. He had gambled with neighborhood funds and lost, and they had conspired in the silence to cover it up. So I took out loans. I worked through every certification. I paid for every compliance audit with money earned from consulting gigs and late-night filings. The stolen fund became a silent, cold stone in my gut, a debt that had been created long before the one Roger now claimed I owed the HOA. I learned to live a double life. By day, I was in the library or later in a corporate cubicle studying for HOA compliance certifications, the world of regulations, of covenants, of UCC filings and liability clauses. It was a language of pure cold logic. There was no emotion in a covenant, only terms. There was no gray area, only what was written and signed. By night, I worked in the chaotic, high-energy world of event logistics for property management firms. I managed crews, dealt with temperamental clients, and learned to solve impossible problems at 3 a.m. with nothing but a roll of gaffer tape and sheer force of will. The two worlds seemed opposite, but they taught me the same lesson. Power lies in controlling the structure of a thing. Whether it's the load-in schedule for a tech conference or the indemnity clause in a service agreement. During my first year as a compliance analyst, my boss, a sharp, unforgiving woman named Maria, reviewed a report I'd written. She tossed it back on my desk. "This is fine, Elena, but it's just words. Your value isn't what you think or what you feel. Your value is what you can prove on paper." Her words hit me like a physical blow. What you can prove on paper. I thought of the Lost Welcome Fund, a phantom number with no paper trail I could access. I thought of the shove in the hallway, an event with no witnesses who would ever speak for me. They had left no proof. I realized then that my entire life had been defined by things I couldn't prove. Maria had given me the key. From that day forward, I became obsessed with documentation, with creating a record. I remembered her words vividly the day I signed the incorporation papers for my own company. My name, Elena Voss, printed in bold black ink above the title President and CEO. The paper was heavy. The ink was permanent. It was real. It was provable. The first major contract I landed, a 7-figure deal to audit a chain of luxury HOAs, felt less like a financial victory and more like a legal one. My signature, my terms. I had built a fortress of paper around myself. Over the next few years, the texts would come, always from Pat, but I knew they were a joint effort. The community is for sharing. Elena, one might read after I'd posted a rare photo from a work trip. Hope you're remembering the neighbors who got you there. Another time after he'd seen my new modest used car. Must be nice. Some of us still have to work for the HOA. They were probes. Little tests to see if the guilt and obligation had taken root. They were invoices for a welcome they felt entitled to bill me for. I never took the bait. I would reply with a bland, non-committal emoji or a simple, "Hope the grass is green." I didn't celebrate my successes with them. I didn't announce the big contracts or the expansion of my business. Instead, after every significant milestone, I made 2 calls. The first was to my accountant to manage the assets. The second was to my lawyer to update the file. The file was my proof. It contained a meticulously documented history, the approximate value of the Welcome Fund, with expert analysis on its projected growth had it been properly invested, a timeline of every fabricated citation, a private investigator's report on Roger's business, detailing his debts, his assets, his over-leveraged pride, the bruise on my cheek, which had faded in a week. But the memory, the cold, hard legal memory of that night and everything it represented remained. It became the foundation of my strategy. I made a vow to myself in the sterile quiet of my lawyer's office 5 years ago. I would not engage in their petty emotional warfare. I would not scream or cry or argue at another board meeting. I would not give them the satisfaction of a fight. If I was ever going to pay the debt they claimed the neighborhood was owed, I would do it, but I would pay it on my own terms. I would pay it with interest. I would pay it in clauses and covenants. I would pay it on paper where it could be proven, witnessed, and notarized. And now, here we were at my table. The wine was poured. The opening arguments had been made. And the proof, all of it, was sitting inside a dark blue leather folder, waiting to be entered into evidence. The heavy oak door swung open with a pneumatic hiss, and a waiter entered, moving with the silent, practiced grace of a ballet dancer. He carried a large silver tray bearing our first course, a deconstructed scallop crudo, with slivers of translucent shellfish arranged like petals around a pool of yuzu and chili oil. It was art on a plate, delicate and expensive. Roger watched the waiter place the dish in front of him with undisguised contempt. He picked up his fork, a heavy, ornate piece of silver, and jabbed at a slice of scallop. "What is this bait?" he said, his voice loud enough to carry through the door if it were open. He looked from his plate to me, a malicious glint in his eye. He was performing, using the waiter as an audience to reassert his dominance. "Must be costing you a fortune for this fancy fish bait. Elena, hope you're ready for the bill. It's going to be a whopper." The young waiter froze for a split second, his professional mask slipping into a look of discomfort before he snapped it back into place. I gave him a slight reassuring nod. He retreated and the door clicked shut, sealing us back in our silent arena. I ignored Roger's comment completely, as one ignores the barking of a territorial dog. Instead, I caught Jean-Luc's eye through the small rectangular window in the door. I had asked him to watch for my signal. This was it. He nodded almost imperceptibly and disappeared. A moment later, he re-entered the room, holding the familiar leather bill folio. "Pardon the interruption, Ms. Voss," he said smoothly. "But you asked me to bring this to you when you had a moment." He placed the folio on the table beside my right hand. "That was fast," Tyler smirked, "already calling it a night." "No," I said, not looking at him. I reached into my clutch and took out my card. It was made of brushed black metal, heavy and cold. I didn't slide it into the folio. Instead, I placed it directly on the white linen tablecloth about a foot from the folder. It landed with a sharp, resonant clang. The sound cut through the room, metallic and definitive. It was nothing like the soft slide of plastic. It was the sound of something solid, substantial, unyielding. All three of them stared at it. The small black rectangle sat there absorbing the light. Pat was the first to speak, her voice a hushed whisper. "Elena, what kind of card is that?" "It's a company card, Pat," I said simply. As if on cue, the waiter returned to clear our plates. He inclined his head slightly as he reached for mine. "I hope everything was to your satisfaction, Ms. Voss." The finance team from Averton was very complimentary about the catering at last month's conference. They said it was the smoothest event they'd attended all year. I saw Tyler's fork stop halfway to his mouth. His face went blank. Averton, a publicly traded tech giant, the kind of client his business school professors used as a case study. The words finance team and conference were a language he understood perfectly. The scale of such an event, the budget, the liability, his mind, the calculator, was visibly whirring, trying to process this new impossible data point. His neighbor, the one who was just doing okay, did not cater events for companies like Averton. Roger, of course, missed the nuance entirely. He laughed. A short, harsh bark. "Conference? Is that what you're calling it? So you're a party planner. Big deal. That's not making money. That's spending it. Spending other people's money to throw a fancy get-together." He waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. For him, value was forged in sweat and noise, in swinging a shovel and hauling mulch up a ladder. My world was abstract and therefore contemptible. I turned my head slowly to look at him, my gaze level and calm. "Money is just a metric, Roger," I said, my voice low and even. "It's a way to keep score. Real power is in the contracts that move the money." Pat, ever the strategist, saw her opening and changed tactics. The aggressive frontal assault had failed, hitting a wall she hadn't anticipated. It was time for a flanking maneuver. Her voice softened, losing its hard, demanding edge and taking on a warm, conspiratorial tone. She leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table, creating an illusion of intimacy. "Honey," she began, "Roger is just, you know how he is. He's a simple man. He works hard." She paused, letting the implication of my not working hard hang in the air. "The HOA has been tough lately. The economy, the special assessments, you wouldn't understand the pressures." I let her continue. "We need a little help, that's all. To get back on our feet for the community projects. To secure the common areas." She finally named her price, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if sharing a secret. "Just $120,000. Elena, to get the suppliers off Roger's back and catch up on the loans. A loan for the neighborhood from a neighbor. You can do that for us, can't you?" She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. It was a masterful performance, the beleaguered matriarch trying to hold her community together against the harsh realities of the world, asking her successful resident for a handout. I held her gaze for a long moment. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit with the raw, naked number she had just placed on the table, $120,000. Then I nodded. Yes. The surprise on their faces was palpable. Tyler looked stunned. Roger looked suspicious. Pat looked relieved, a triumphant glint appearing in her eyes. They had been prepared for an argument, for pleading, for a negotiation down to a lower number. My immediate capitulation was a victory they hadn't expected to win so easily. "I'll provide the $120,000, I confirmed. I let them savor the moment for a beat. Then I added the condition. "But it will be done correctly, in writing." I reached for the heavy dark blue leather folder. My movements were slow, deliberate. I untied the simple leather cord that held it shut and opened it flat on the table. It was not a checkbook. It was a document, several pages long, printed on thick, heavy bond paper. The top of the first page bore a title in a clean, bold sans serif font. I slid it to the center of the table, turning it so they could read the title. "A Community Assistance Agreement," I announced into the stunned silence. Roger squinted at the paper, his lips moving as he slowly read the words. A look of pure, unadulterated outrage washed over his face. He pushed his chair back violently, the legs groaning against the floor. "What the hell is this?" he roared, his voice bouncing off the stark walls of the room. He jabbed a thick finger at the document. "Sign something? Are you kidding me? We're the board. The neighborhood doesn't leverage unwritten obligations to solve financial problems created by one person's mismanagement," I replied, my voice perfectly level. The outburst hadn't rattled me. It was expected. A board that operates on trust and respect doesn't need to. Since that isn't the case here, we will use a document. I tapped a manicured finger on the title. As you can see, it's a community assistance agreement. It formalizes the help you asked for. I then pointed to the first line below the title. The beneficiary of this assistance, a one-time 0% interest loan of $120,000, is Patricia Whitaker. I paused, letting the words land. Your name, Roger, does not appear on the loan. The money is for Pat. Pat's head snapped up. Tyler's eyes darted between the document and me. This was the first cut, surgically separating them. The money was for her, the asset, not for him, the liability. Now, I continued, turning the first page with a crisp rustle of paper. Let's go over the key terms. They're very straightforward. I pointed to the first numbered paragraph. Clause 1. Acknowledgement of prior funds. I looked directly at Roger. This clause states that you, Roger Whitaker, acknowledge the misappropriation and subsequent loss of the Welcome Fund originally valued at $50,000 in the year I moved in, with interest and market-adjusted growth over the past 14 years. That sum is valued today at approximately $145,000. This agreement stipulates that your signature acknowledges this prior debt. That sum is hereby considered a full and final settlement of any and all perceived, implied, or stated financial obligations I have to the HOA personally as a resident. It wipes the slate clean. No more talk of what I owe for mulch color or anything else. The color drained from Roger's face. Pat flinched as if I'd struck her. The bad break, the unlucky investment, was now laid bare in cold black ink. It was no longer a sad community story. It was Clause 1. Clause 2, I said, moving on without giving them time to recover. The no interference covenant. My gaze shifted to Pat, but the words were for him. By signing, Roger agrees not to interfere, financially or otherwise, with Patricia's management of her household or personal affairs. The house is in Pat's name. This ensures it stays that way. He will have no claim to this loan, and he will not be a party to how it is used to secure her home and the community accounts. This is my neighborhood too, Roger blustered. But his voice had lost its confident roar. It was defensive. The bylaws say otherwise, I stated flatly. And this document reinforces that fact. I moved to the next point. Clause 3 is the most important part for you, Pat. It's a protective measure. It stipulates that should Roger engage in any act of physical intimidation, threat, or violence against you or any resident, this loan immediately converts into a non-repayable financial grant. It becomes a gift from me to the community, entirely free and clear. Furthermore, your signature on this document pre-authorizes my legal team to file an emergency order of protection on your behalf, using his violation of the covenant as grounds. It gives you an escape hatch with the financial and legal backing to see it through. Pat stared at the words. Her lips parted. She was seeing not just a loan, but a shield, a way out she had never imagined. Now we come to the business, I said, my tone becoming even more businesslike. Clause 4. Assignment of commercial debt. I looked at Tyler, knowing he would understand this faster than the others. As of 4 p.m. this afternoon, my holding company legally acquired all outstanding commercial debt for Whitaker Landscaping from your primary creditor, North Shore Commercial Lending. The deal has closed. The debt is mine. Tyler's jaw literally dropped. He looked like I had just told him the sky was green. He understood what this meant. I wasn't just a potential lender. I was the lender. Which brings us to the final point, I said, my voice dropping slightly. Clause 5. Terms of execution. I looked at Roger, the man who had shoved me, the man who had stolen from the community, the man who had just tried to bully me into funding his failed pride. When you sign this agreement, Roger, a 60-day grace period begins on your commercial debt, allowing you to restructure. If you refuse to sign, then the standard collection process, which was initiated by my purchase of the debt, will proceed as scheduled. The asset seizure is slated to begin tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. The tow trucks are already on standby. The room was utterly silent, save for the faint, distant clink of glasses from the main dining room. The pretense of a meal was gone. The white tablecloth was no longer a setting for dinner. It was the sterile field of a surgical theater. The heavy navy blue pens in the silver cup were not for signing a credit card slip. They were the scalpels. The document with its neat paragraphs and numbered clauses sat in the center of the table. An irrefutable diagnosis and a proposed radical treatment. The table was no longer a table. It was a fulcrum, and the balance of power in our neighborhood was resting upon it, ready to tip. Pat found her voice first, a weak, trembling sound. Elena. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over hers. Her skin was cold. This isn't a punishment, Pat, I said softly but with an edge of steel. It's a solution. You asked for $120,000 to save the common areas and the accounts. This agreement does that, but it does it in a way that protects you. The money I'm paying tonight is for your safety, for your independence. It's not for him to hold the reins any longer. My words, my touch seemed to steady her. She looked from the document to Roger, her expression hardening with a resolve I hadn't seen in 20 years. Roger finally broke his stunned silence. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, ugly, incredulous sound, devoid of any real humor. It was the sound of a man who couldn't comprehend the trap that had just closed around him. "You're threatening me," he sneered, leaning forward, his big hands flat on the table. "You think you can come in here with some fancy paperwork and threaten me? Who the hell do you think you are?" "I'm the person who came prepared," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster with the clean, sharp edge of a scalpel. "You see threats because that's the only language you speak. Roger, I speak the language of contracts, of assets, and liabilities." My hand went to the document with a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. I turned the page. The heavy bond paper made a soft, authoritative shush as it settled. There on the new page was a document that was clearly not part of the agreement. It was a copy of a legal filing complete with a timestamp from the Illinois Secretary of State's office from yesterday afternoon and a digital filing number. The title at the top was unmistakable to anyone who had ever dealt with commercial lending. UCC 1 Financing Statement. A uniform commercial code filing. A public declaration of a security interest in a debtor's assets. It is, in simple terms, the document that says what's yours is mine if you don't pay. "I don't expect you to understand the finer points of commercial law," I said, my tone as neutral as a newsreader's. "So let me draw your attention to Exhibit A." I tapped a neatly indented section of the filing. The list of secured collateral. It's quite specific. I read from the page, my voice even and measured. 1. A 2023 Ford F-250 Super Duty truck, VIN number ending in 8451. 2. 1 Vermeer Metalmaster 20 Easy commercial grade mower. 3. All sets of aluminum scaffolding ladders and associated planking currently stored at the Whitaker Landscaping commercial address. I paused, letting the inventory of his professional life hang in the air, the truck he polished every Sunday, the heavy-duty mower that was the centerpiece of his workshop, the scaffolding that was the backbone of every HOA job he took, the very tools of his identity. Roger stared at the paper, his face a storm of confusion and rage. He didn't understand the form, but he understood the list. He understood the VIN number. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, unhealthy gray before a wave of crimson surged back up his thick neck. He sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the document, then at me. "You. What is this? You can't." His mind was catching up, the gears grinding as the terrible truth began to dawn. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horror that was for the first time completely genuine. You bought my debt." "Yes," I said. There was no triumph in my voice. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation of a transaction. North Shore was happy to offload a non-performing loan from their books before the end of the quarter. They sold it to my holding company for 32 cents on the dollar. 32 cents. I saw the number land on him like a physical blow. He wasn't just in debt. He was a fire sale. His entire professional worth, his lifetime of hard work, had been liquidated at a 68% discount. I reached out and, with the tip of one finger, slid the leather billfolio, the one Jean-Luc had brought for the dinner, to the far edge of the table, dismissing it. "I'm paying tonight, Roger," I said, my voice very quiet. "I'm paying for this dinner, and I'm paying for everything you owe. All of it the legal way." As I spoke, Jean-Luc, ever watchful, gave a nearly imperceptible nod towards the entrance of the main dining room. My eyes flickered in that direction. At a small two-person table near the corridor, a man in a simple anonymous gray coat who had been quietly looking at his phone looked up. He met my gaze for a fraction of a second, then went back to his screen. He was compact, impassive, and utterly professional. He was the representative from the asset recovery agency my lawyer had contracted. He was my plan B, quiet, polite man who would, if necessary, oversee the orderly removal of Roger's entire world in the morning. He was just waiting for a text message. My focus returned to the table. Tyler was staring at me, his MBA-trained mind finally grasping the scale and complexity of what I had done. He looked pale, shaken. "When?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "When did you do all of this?" "Elena." "How?" I finally turned to look at my neighbor's son. "I started the process the moment you posted Roger's cash flow statement in the board group chat last week," I said, my voice devoid of accusation. A simple statement of causality. "You sent it with 3 laughing emojis and called it a total disaster." "I called it due diligence." Tyler recoiled, as if I had burned him. His attempt at familial mockery, his need to feel superior to his father, had been the key that unlocked everything. He had handed me the ammunition himself. I saw Pat's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide. The pieces were clicking into place for her, too. Every complaint she'd made on the phone, every tearful text about Roger's temper and the mounting bills, every scrap of information she had offered up in what she thought were moments of shared confidence. I hadn't just been listening. I had been compiling. Her laments had become my data points. Her narrative of victimhood had become the foundation for my legal strategy. She had been my primary and most reliable source. The shock in the room was a physical presence. The air was thick with it. I had not just turned the tables. I had revealed that the game they thought they were playing was a complete illusion. They were playing checkers. I had been playing chess. The story ended there. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Share your thoughts on Elena's final move. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And if you really want to support this story, hit that hype button to help it be heard by more people.